Hi, my name is Derek. I recently had a conversation with one of my YouTube viewers where he began his comments by calling America a country full of psychopaths. Now that conversation ended with him asking a question. What are American gun laws? He genuinely wanted to know. And I regret that that conversation never got finished because I knew at the time answering him would take too long. And so this is my attempt at making a video helping people to understand a little bit more about American gun laws.
First, I'll start with some basic definitions. This is a pistol. This is a rifle. This is not a shotgun, even though it fires 12-gauge shotgun shells. This is not a pistol, shotgun, or rifle. This is not a pistol, shotgun, or rifle. And same with this one. This gun is not a gun, even though it was common throughout the Wild West. Confused? I'd be surprised if you weren't. I'll explain each of these examples later, but what I'm trying to show you first and foremost is that American gun law is not straightforward at all. That's probably why if you search on YouTube, what are American gun laws, this is what you'll get. No explanation of laws, only commentary and opinions of both sides. There's a lot to unpack here, that's why these videos aren't made, so I'll have to explain a little bit of history before going over specific laws.
In order to understand American gun law, you need to understand the basics of American government. Congress makes laws, the Supreme Court interprets the law, and the President enforces the law through his or her agencies.
The United States is a constitutional democratic republic and uses the Constitution as a standard for making new laws. The only wording in the Constitution that addresses firearms directly is the Second Amendment.
The Second Amendment has been the source of debate for many decades. In an effort to maintain neutrality about the issue, I'm going to read it in two different ways. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
It's fundamental to understand that since the founding of the country until today, there's been a long debate about how much power individual states have and how much power the central government has. This is also known as federalist or anti-federalist views. The interplay of power between each state and the central government plays a huge part in understanding our gun laws. Regardless of how individuals feel about any issue, the US is guided by the rule of law, meaning that whether you're a homeless guy, super rich, backwoods, or royalty, the law applies equally. Unfortunately, it doesn't always happen this way, but that's what the standard is. The Supreme Court is considered the final place where the interpretation of laws is decided. Many Supreme Court decisions over the years are controversial, but once something is ruled on, that becomes the official interpretation for all states to follow. However, it's common in the US for individual states to pass laws contrary to Supreme Court rulings. Each time this happens, the new laws are challenged in court, and it goes through the whole process again. This is on all issues, and it happens all the time. It might surprise you that in 243 years of US history, there are only 5 Supreme Court cases that directly address the Second Amendment. United States v. Cruikshank in 1875, Presser v. Illinois in 1886, United States v. Miller in 1939, District of Columbia v. Heller in 2008, and McDonald v. Chicago in 2010. Even more surprising is that it wasn't until the last 2 cases that they debated about what the writers of the Constitution meant when they talked about the militia and how it relates to individuals having firearms.
In 2008, the Supreme Court ruled in Heller v. D.C. in a 5-4 decision that the right of the people to keep and bear arms was an individual right separate from militia service. According to that case, it also does not mean that a person can have any firearm for any purpose. Most courts, including the Supreme Court, are guided by a legal principle called stare decisis, meaning to stand by what is already decided. This prevents them from having to rule on the same issues year after year. It does not mean things are set in stone and the Supreme Court can revisit issues that were already ruled on. It does mean that the longer a case is used as a guiding standard, the more difficult it will be to overturn years of court rulings. I will include a link to the audio transcript of that case in the description below. Because the Second Amendment is the only text in the Constitution that mentions firearms, it's left to the several states to decide how to regulate them. However, the Constitution does say that Congress has the power to control interstate commerce. And it is through the power of controlling interstate commerce that they have regulated firearms on a federal level. This is why for something like a short-barreled rifle, You literally pay a tax on it because it has to do with interstate commerce. In large part, it is left to the states to decide how to regulate firearms. This is important to understand because when it comes to firearms laws, two states next to each other can seem like different countries entirely. If a citizen feels that their state has made a law that is too restrictive of their Second Amendment right, they can challenge that in court, and if it goes high enough, can go to the Supreme Court of the United States, as it did in Heller versus DC in 2008. It's also important to note that many people trying to obey the law look at only the laws on the books. They also need to look at case law. Those are court cases having to do with those specific written laws, and people need to see how those cases played out. In many states, if I legally own a firearm and want to sell that to somebody else that I don't suspect is a prohibited person, I can do so in a private sale with no paperwork required and no background check necessary. This is sometimes referred to as the gun show loophole, even if it has nothing to do with the gun show. It just means private sales in the United States between individuals that doesn't have a background check done and doesn't necessarily have any paperwork done on it. If somebody buys a gun from a gun shop, they have to fill out Form 4473. Once the form is filled out, a phone call is made to the Bureau for Criminal Identification. They do a background check and see if you've answered truthfully on the form.
Not everyone is aware that they are prohibited from buying a gun. If you're prohibited and try to buy one, you might be detained. It really depends on the circumstances. From 1998 to May 2019, there were 1,639,879 denials to purchase a firearm. A few thousand of those referred to the ATF for further investigation.
I'm now going to share a few other confusing examples of American gun law, and then later in the video, I'll explain them in a lot more detail and exactly how these confusing situations apply directly to the law. Now, you might think I'm trying to be funny with some of these definitions, but unfortunately the reality is if you violate some of these gun laws, you could face up to 10 years in federal prison, and that's just the beginning. What I'm about to explain next may make you go a little bit cross-eyed, but if somebody wants me to buy a gun for them, I could face many years in prison, and that is a serious offense. However, if I choose to go and buy a firearm myself as a gift to somebody else that I don't suspect is a prohibited person, I can legally do that. The difference there is I can receive no compensation if I'm giving it as a gift, whether that's through favors or any sort of money or work of any kind. A lot of people have the opinion that the United States does not have strict gun laws, and certainly in a lot of cases compared to other countries, this is true. We enjoy a lot of freedom here. However, in certain cases, you can receive much stricter penalties depending on where you live in the United States. Take, for example, if you buy a spring-loaded BB gun. Now, in the United Kingdom, if your BB gun is under a certain amount of foot-pounds in energy, then it's considered a toy. However, if you're in the United States, and let's say Susie and Jane are friends and they live 150 yards away from each other across the Delaware River, and Susie lives in Pennsylvania and Jane lives in New Jersey, and they both go to the store and they purchase a BB gun that's spring-loaded. In Pennsylvania, Susie doesn't have to do anything. It's a toy. However, in New Jersey, it's a much different story for Jane. Since she lives in New Jersey, she has to apply for a permit to carry a handgun. If she doesn't have a permit, then she's subject to the Graves Act, which is a mandatory minimum of 5 years in prison and parole no earlier than 3 years. If she gets approved for that permit, it expires in 90 days and she has to continually renew it every 90 days. It's still considered a toy in Pennsylvania. So very different stories depending on where you live, even if it's 150 yards away from each other. Some of you may have seen people put together potato guns out of PVC pipe or other plastic pipe, and if you use compressed air to shoot that potato out, then that is not a firearm. If you use hairspray, gasoline, or any other type of explosive to push that potato out, then that is a firearm. And if you design your potato gun to be fired from the shoulder, then the barrel can be no shorter than 18 inches long. Or if you rifle the inside, meaning you put swirled grooves on the inside of that pipe, it can be no shorter than 16 inches. If you do make it shorter, then you have to pay a special tax, wait a long time, and get it registered with the federal government, submitting your fingerprints and a lot of other identifying information. If I were to take a malted milk ball and then take a piece of brass, put a primer in it, some gunpowder, and then load that malted milk ball into this case, and then take this gun, put in that cartridge, and fire the malted milk ball out, that malted milk ball is defined as armor-piercing ammunition. Unfortunately, I'm not being funny about that. That is serious stuff. Depending on which state I live in, even if I can legally own a firearm, and that's perfectly fine for me to have, if I am not registered with the state as a firearm owner, if I have a single piece of one of these, this is a spent piece of firearms brass, it is literally a piece of metal, then I can go to prison for 2 years. And in fact, that has happened. Look at the link here. This is a short barrel rifle registered with the federal government. I had to submit 3 recent photos of myself, my fingerprints, my social security number, my full name and address, and any other identifying marks about myself, pay a $200 tax stamp, and I had to wait 13 months and 1 day for the paperwork to get back on this. This is a Glock pistol. It shoots 9mm rounds. That's exactly the same bullet as this. I can get a magazine that has the same capacity as this gun, and they both fire at the same rate, as fast as I can pull the trigger. They're both semi-automatic. This is not fully automatic. Now, the major difference in all of that regulation, I can get this the very same day. I have to fill out a single form and get a background check, and then I'll have it the same day. And the major difference in the regulation there is in the vertical foregrip and in the buttstock. Functionally, they're exactly the same. Another thing that's interesting to note about American gun law is that my friend has this exact same firearm, but in a slightly different configuration. Functionally, it's exactly the same in every way, except it doesn't have the vertical foregrip or the buttstock. It has an arm brace instead. So for him, he doesn't have to fill out any additional paperwork like I did with this. In fact, it is regulated exactly the same as this gun is. Same day, same rate of fire, same capacity, and he can take it across state lines without permission. Of course, like we discussed before, it really depends on where you live. If you take it across certain state lines, you can get in big trouble. By the way, everything I've just told you could be completely wrong depending on which of the 50 states or U.S. territories you live in. Welcome to American gun law.
Let's go back and more carefully review the examples I shared earlier. This is called a Draco pistol. It shoots the same rounds that an AK-47 shoots, however it's defined as a pistol because of this portion right here. This is an arm brace and not a buttstock. Looking at the definitions between a pistol and a pistol is intended to be fired from one hand. A rifle is designed and intended to be fired from the shoulder. Since the arm brace was not designed or intended to be fired from the shoulder, this is a pistol. I'd also like to add before I go on, in case you think I'm just making this up, the ATF, the agency responsible for enforcing the law on firearms, are the ones who issued these letters, making it clear what these firearms are defined as. This is an old cowboy gun, a single-action revolver, possibly an Uberti cattleman. What makes this different is the attachment of the stock, which, if we look at the definition of a rifle, is designed and intended to be fired from the shoulder and has a rifled barrel. The rifled barrel is important to distinguish it from shotguns. Both this firearm and this firearm are defined as firearms and not shotguns for the following reasons. Once again, in the definition, a shotgun is designed and intended to be fired from the shoulder, and here there is no buttstock to be fired from the shoulder, and this one has an arm brace. These fire shot shells have a smooth bore and so are defined simply as a firearm. Here we have a pistol, but it's not a pistol because someone has attached a vertical foregrip. This defines it as an AOW or an any other weapon. A special tax stamp is required for this, and you have to submit a lot of paperwork, fingerprints, and wait a long time before you can assemble this gun.
This last example is fairly unique as well. It shoots the same ammunition that an AR-15 shoots, the .223 Remington or .556 NATO, and in all respects it looks like an AR-15 from the outside. However, what makes this different is this does not have a rifled barrel, and it does not have a smooth barrel. The lands and grooves, or the raised surfaces on the inside of the barrel, are perfectly straight, instead of curved like traditional rifling. This is a Winchester 1873, and the reason it's not defined as a firearm is because it's defined as an antique firearm. Here's the definition. Because this one was either manufactured before 1898 or may have been manufactured this morning and is a replica, that means under federal law it is not considered a firearm. However, in places like New Jersey and some other states, it is absolutely considered a firearm. The examples of the potato gun, the BB gun, the short barrel rifle, and the armor-piercing ammunition all have to do with the definitions as defined under United States codes. The idea for the law against armor-piercing ammunition was to protect police officers, since they often wear soft body armor. However, if you understand firearms, you know that basically any rifle cartridge will go through soft body armor. Rather than banning all rifle cartridges, the resulting law was this. The idea behind 922R was to stop importation of foreign guns into the US market. It resulted in this. Some of you will see this video and think clearly this is why we need more regulation of guns in the United States. Others will look at this and say clearly this is why gun laws have already gone too far. Everything I've talked about so far has to do with firearm ownership. I've discussed nothing about where you can carry them, how you can carry them, in what ways you can use them, and what exactly constitutes a prohibited person. I know we're used to quick answers in our day and age, but if you want to learn more about these other aspects of firearms law, you'll have to research your specific area you intend to live in or do live in.
Machine guns, or fully automatic weapons, tanks, flamethrowers, and silencers or suppressors are all legal in the United States. Outside of military and law enforcement use, newly manufactured machine guns were made illegal with the Firearm Owners Protection Act in 1986. That leaves a fixed supply with approximately 100 to 175,000 available. The least expensive of these runs $6,000 to $7,000, usually taking several months to a year to receive the right paperwork for them. The legality of bump stocks and other similar devices is currently being debated in the United States. Explosives such as dynamite, grenades, or mortars are not legal unless you have a dealer or manufacturer license. Any guns which shoot a projectile greater than half an inch or 12.7 millimeters in diameter is classified the same as grenades and other explosive devices. I'm going to share my opinions and commentary in part 2 because, like the title says, this is an unbiased guide. However, before you leave, I want to be real with you guys. I find it incredibly frustrating to use YouTube as a platform for education about firearms. I think firearms education and safety, so that you know how to obey the law, is incredibly important. However, the way the YouTube algorithms are designed, very few people who don't own guns or know nothing about them will be directed to this video. Those are really the people I'm trying to reach. I understand there's a lot of different opinions about gun control, but I just want people to be correctly informed before they join a debate or sign a petition or support a new gun law. Before leaving, I also want to let people know my own situation. It's likely this video will be demonetized, not because it's violated any of YouTube's rules whatsoever, but because anything gun related is demonetized and a channel as small as mine has no recourse. These videos are only manually reviewed after they receive more than 1,000 views per day. That's virtually impossible for a small channel like mine. Recently I had a couple videos demonetized. So what are these two dangerous videos I'm talking about? One was me shooting a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and watching it explode in slow motion, and the other one was titled Gun Safety for Beginners. Now, I've noticed there's about 50 to 60 people that regularly watch my new videos as soon as they come up. I want to talk to you directly. You're the people that I know support me and all my efforts to spend hours and hours editing and researching this stuff and putting it all together. For you few, it is worth it. And for any one or two people who knew nothing about American gun law, to me, it is worth it. So thank you for watching. Before continuing on to part 2, I want to let you know it is biased and it is just my opinions. So if you'd like to hear that as well, please click on the link. Until next time, this is Derek reminding you, you're working too hard.